Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. So I am here with another great guest. I am your host, John Brackett. I have Willie Mandrell participating in our show, and I think Willie's going to be a great guest. You know, today we're going to do something a little different. Willie has built a niche in the multifamily space. He's out in Boston. He's been doing this since 2006, so I'm going to introduce him formally to you. But today, I'm going to start off by summarizing a couple things that we're going to talk about that I know will bring value to our audience. Today, we're going to talk about financing. We're going to talk about deal sourcing and closing. And then we're also going to talk about construction. So these are a couple of things that Willie has expressed around being his strengths. And so I thought would be a great conversation, predominantly because inside of this space, all of those different components are vital to actually not only closing deals, but also building out a profitable portfolio, right? So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Willie formally to everybody, and then, we're going to move through this. So Willie Mandrell is a self-made millionaire, real estate investor, broker, coach, lecturer, and author. As a buyer, seller, and broker, he's been involved in well over about $200 million worth of real estate. Now, he's been featured in numerous trade publications and magazines, and he is a frequent guest on Real Estate and Wealth podcasts, television and radio shows across the U.S. Willie is a author of Cash Flow Secrets, a book on real estate investing and finance. And most people are never taught, but should know. So Willie, welcome to the show, man.
I appreciate you having me, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Really appreciate you being here. Very excited to get this show underway. So Willie, share with us your background. I'm very interested in learning your background, learning your story, and how did you work your way to being an investor?
My grandparents were investors, primarily my grandmother. My grandfather was in the Army, was gone a lot. My grandmother was introduced to the multifamily business by a friend of hers. It was just kind of on a whim that she ended up buying a multifamily. It was actually a boarding house at the time. And she kind of just fell in love with the business, the idea of collecting rents and somebody else paying off your mortgage and then taking some equity out and going out and buying another one. And when my brothers and I came along, got out of school, she said, look, this is what you should do. I went to school for finance. I went to Northeastern here in Boston, and I understood the basis of corporate finance. I understood, well, at least I thought I understood money at the time. And I knew that I wanted to purchase a home. I knew that wealth was built around home ownership, land ownership. But in my eyes, I think I was 23 when we had this conversation, and I wanted the condo life, the swimming pool, somebody else doing my maintenance for me, all the easy livings. And she said, don't do that. Buy something with multiple units in it. Have somebody else pay down your bills for you. And I'm glad I listened to her. In that first purchase, 2006, I bought a multifamily right outside the city, a two-family. I had one tenant paying me roughly $1,800 bucks, somewhere around there. Roughly 65% of my mortgage paid off by someone else. And for those of you who remember, old enough to have lived through that as an adult, would probably remember 2006 was very close to the height of the market. I was in financial services at the time. The stock market crashed in 2007, took a serious tumble down. I think by the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, it had been slashed in half. Housing market, 2008 wasn't too far behind. 2009, 2010 were really rough years. But, one of the things that I learned through reading Warren Buffett, following him through finance, is that the economy works in cycles. I understood that what was 2006, let's say a property was worth $500,000, and it was now worth $300,000 in 2009. Well, that wasn't going to stay $300,000. That was a good asset, and the rental income that was coming out of that was still strong. So those are the assets that we went after, the 300, the 400 that was at one time 6 and 7. And through 2010, 11, 12, 13, we did what Warren Buffett does and picks up things at a value, at a discount. When everyone else is running and foreclosures are high and unemployment is high, we started buying assets at a discount that we thought were at a discount, renting them out. And today, 10 years later, a good portion of those assets have doubled in value. Rents have doubled since then. And, we continue to kind of just buy a little bit more strategically now, but we're continuing to buy in this market as well.
Okay, awesome, man. I really appreciate the summary. So you said something, Willie, that really stood out, right? And so you have a background in finance, right? So you understand corporate finance, you understand the mechanics, the principles behind corporate finance. But your comment was that I understood corporate finance, and then you followed up with, I think I did. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, I understood corporate finance, but corporate finance doesn't necessarily mean that you understand money. So I thought I understood money. Personal finance and wealth building, financial freedom is completely different than what they teach you in school is corporate finance. When I went to school for finance, I thought that I was learning about money. I was in a sense, but it was more managerial accounting. It was the insides and outs, the two sides of accounting and financial accounting. It was corporate finance in terms of inventory management, how Walmart manages their inventory. I think it's called just-in-time inventory stock. So all that stuff was great education. It's great stuff to help you out in the corporate world, but it still leads you to getting a job in corporate. When I say personal finance and when I say I thought I understood money, what I meant and what I now understand is, and I think economics is something that regardless of what you take in school, whether my wife's a pharmacist, regardless of what program you take, you should take macro and microeconomics. I think it's very important because that'll teach you how the Federal Reserve works, how interest rates are determined, what happens when we have an economic slowdown, what happens when unemployment goes up, what happens when we have a foreclosure crisis. And all those things that I got the basis of in economics in school, I furthered my education and really understood money when I started picking up Rich Dad, Poor Dad, when I started picking up The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller, when I started learning about really how money flows through the economy and how during downtimes, that's when real wealth is built by those people that keep their eyes open. When I learned about not following the crowd, when I learned about when everyone else is running left, you need to be looking for opportunities right. When everyone else is headed this way, you need to be looking over here because there's often things that are left behind. When everybody else is selling off, you should be looking at buying because that supply and demand, it all really comes back down to economics. Supply and demand tells us when everyone else is selling, then you should be looking at picking up things at a discount, right? If there's a vast amount of sellers and a shortage of buyers, well, I have my pick now. If this seller doesn't give me the deal that I want, I can always go to the next seller. And if they don't give me a deal that I want, I can go to the next seller because there is a inverse relationship between the two. And hopefully that makes sense.
You know what it does. So let me kind of expand upon that and put that in a context that I think also our viewers can apply that to in this marketplace, right? So I really appreciate what you said because, one of the things that you said that I think stood out was going the opposite direction of the masses, right? Going the opposite direction of the masses, but also be strategic in how you're doing so by understanding the economic cycles. Because, I always say that one of the great things about the United States, amazing country, but it's also very predictable, right? Our economic cycles are very, very predictable. And I think as long as you can associate yourself with the predictability of these cycles, it becomes much easier to accumulate and build wealth. Now, you touched on something that I thought was really wise, man, and that was there's a huge difference between what we learn in school, right, around finance and actually how to build wealth. We can use one to do the other, but I think the learnings that happen inside of the real world on how to build wealth, the principles, they carry over, but how you apply them forward are very different.
Right.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the differences that you learned in school and what you had to start learning out there in the real world, right? In the world of investing, what was the greatest lesson that you learned inside of academia, the world of academia, that you were able to apply in your business today? Okay, and then what was the greatest lesson that you learned as an entrepreneur that you did not learn in school?
I would say the greatest lesson in school that I applied today is, again, it goes back to economics, how the economy itself works in cycles. We have upswings, we have downswings, we have peaks, and we have valleys. But that trend always tends to be upward at the end of the day. If you look at stock market charts over the last 100 years or whatever it may be, or as long as the stock market's been in existence, you have peaks, you have valleys, you have ups and downs. But at the end of the day, the trend is always upward. I think you'd have to almost look at a chart to see that. And the housing chart or housing value chart is very similar. My grandmother bought that property in the south end of Boston, which is now known Copley, Newberry Street. She bought that house for $50,000 in the 1950s. Absolutely insane. You can't buy a parking lot or a parking spot in Boston for that number anymore. Though she's lived through, or she had lived through before she passed. And again, just in my time, we've had the recession in 83. We had another recession in the early 90s. We had a really long swing and then the crash in 2006 and 7. Coronavirus may bring something else. So just the understanding that you're going to have ups and downs, and the goal really is to survive the downs and really thrive when you have those upswings. Do what you can to shelter yourself or protect yourself from those downswings, but really start to get aggressive when you're trending up. So that would be the lesson in school, is economics. And I really do think that no matter what you do in your life, whether you're a nurse, whether you're an auto mechanic, I really do think that if you understand the basics of how the economy works, you're going to be better off for it. Outside of school, and this may seem really cliche, but it is the absolute truth, that it is not what you know, it's who. And when I got out of school, I was very much a student. I picked up every single book, and you can see some of them in the background there. I've read every finance book. I mean, I've read from the E-Myth to Millionaire Real Estate Investor to 10X Rule to them all. And the problem that I had is I wouldn't say the smartest guy, but I knew cap rates. I knew all the technical terms and terminology, but I really wasn't making any progress early on in my career. I wasn't going anywhere because all that knowledge is great. But if you don't have the resources, the connections, the commercial lenders, the wholesalers, and the real estate agents don't know who you are, that's really where you make money, is within your network. I learned more from other people and other real estate agents and other commercial lenders and everything else than I did from the pages of those books. So that got me the base of knowledge, but it's the other people that I'm surrounding myself with now that really have grown my wealth or helped me grow wealth over time.
Okay, so elaborate on that a little bit. When you say it's the people that I surround myself with now, because when I hear that, I interpret that a couple different ways, right?
Yep.
I interpret that as, okay, I got to the point where I started taking massive action, and then I started exposing myself to people that were also very, very active. And because of that, right, I started to learn more. The other way that I heard that was I was really intentional about seeking out some very specific people to mentor me, to teach me. And then when it's all said and done, you still have to take action for that stuff to actually stick and for you to understand how it works. So which of the two paths did you actually take that you felt created the greatest contribution to building your wealth today?
I think it's the former. I think it's surrounding myself with like-minded people. I think people that believe in what I believe in. And I'm sorry to get sidetracked here, but I think I have 2 young kids, so we watch all these incredible movies and Disney Channel movies. And one of the things that is in The Incredibles, it's a cartoon kids movies, but I think one of the lines is, not everyone will be incredible. Everyone has the opportunity to summarize like that. But it rings true with me, or it felt true with me, because I felt like everyone has the ability to go out there and be successful, but not everyone will, right? If everyone had success, it wouldn't be success. It would just kind of be the way of life, right? So you're going to have a select few people who really want to pursue greatness, who really want to pursue financial freedom and wealth. And those are the people that I really went out and, regardless of their level of success at the time, I wanted to surround myself with people who had that drive, people who had that desire to just really move forward. And as somebody who was 25, 26, 27, I knew that I was going to be in this business for 30 years, right? So surrounding myself with other professionals, whether they were mortgage brokers, whether they were real estate agents, whether they were financial consultants, whether they were insurance brokers, people that had that drive to be great, to be successful, to be incredible, those are the people that I wanted to surround myself with. And to give you a more specific example, throughout the last, I would say 5 or 6 years, I've been able to call a few banks and say, I have a great deal, help me finance this. And there were probably 2 or 3 banks that I would work with. With the emergence of coronavirus, banks have kind of dried up, right? Some banks went from 80-20 LTVs down to 70, LTV. Some banks went from debt to income ratios or debt coverage ratios that were 1.1 to 1.5. So lending became a little bit more difficult. I was able to go out and basically, through my connections, through other investors that I connected with, just ask a couple questions and got connected with a couple good mortgage brokers who are now setting myself up to close 3 or 4 deals in the next couple months. So just having other people the idea too is a little bit of a sidetrack, but the idea that other investors in your market are competition was something that was flawed in me from the very beginning.
That's a great point, man.
I'm sitting here talking to you and we're building a relationship. We're learning about each other. Other investors are not competition. They are colleagues. And that's the way you have to look at it is we're out here. I've gotten more business from other investors, more partnerships, more deals, more just opportunities from other investors than from any place else. I can talk to every mortgage broker, every wholesaler, but it is other investors that call me up and say, hey, I just took on 3 deals and I just found a great lead. I can't take it on, but would you like to partner on this with me? Or I can wholesale it to you, or we can take this one and I'll take the next one from you, or something like that. So looking at other investors or other professionals in your market as competition is flawed. I think you should look at them as colleagues. And I know I was kind of all over the place there, but hopefully
no, man. This is great, right? Because that's a great point. That's a really important lesson, because I think what that comes down to is it's a mindset shift, right?
Yep.
And I think building wealth ultimately comes down to a mindset, because the very first place that happens is in your mind.
Right.
That's where it first originates, right? Is in your mind. And then how you follow up with that idea is very different. But a lot of the things that you discussed, but being able to, I think, seek people out and view them as an opportunity to learn, I think, man, it makes a huge, huge difference. But I think a lot of that also just comes down to the maturity of the person as well, right? And oftentimes it comes down to, I can only speak to myself with this, but the minute that I started letting go of my ego, I'll tell you a really funny story. So when I was younger and I would go seek out people and go to these seminars and these different business functions that I would pay for, by the way, okay, to go and learn something, to go and solve a problem. That's why I was going, right?
Yeah.
So I would go see these people there that I knew, right? And then they would ask me, hey, John, so how are things going? And of course, things were amazing. Hey, things are going great. Well, if things are always going great, man, I'm not giving people space to actually help me, right?
Right.
So I would always go to these things, come back, and my wife would go, hey, so how was it? And I go, it was just okay. I mean, that was the summary, right? It was okay. And the reality was there was much more that I could have learned there if I simply was willing to ask and tell people the truth about what was going on inside of my companies, right? Like, hey, I'm doing really well here, but man, I'm struggling here. And I know you're really good at this. How do you approach this? How do you solve this problem, or how have you solved this problem? So anyways, when I actually started doing that, by some miraculous reason, man, my business started growing.
No, it's the absolute truth. And one of the things, if I can piggyback on, one of the things I did learn from the books behind me is that one of the things that other things that you kind of learn in school, I wouldn't say it depends on how, sociology. I took a sociology class and maybe a psych class. And one of the things that you learn about people through sales and everything else is that people love to talk about themselves.
Right.
And people love to tell you stories about this and that. And if you want to learn something, if you want to become great and get people to help you, is ask the right questions. Just continue to ask questions and then ask a follow-up question. One of the things that they teach you in sales books, and I think it was, I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but is spend less time talking about yourself, spend more time asking questions, asking follow-up questions, and people will tell you, they'll give you a world of information. It's an incredible tactic. So yeah, to be honest with you, I used to go to those seminars and I used to feel like I had to measure up to whoever was on the other side of that conversation, right? If they were doing, multi-million, I had to do multi-millions, or I felt inadequate. Then I learned how to say, don't worry about that. Just continue. If they're doing something really special, then the goal is for me to pull and extract as much information and lessons from them as possible. So I basically said, look, that's great. How did you do that? That's great.
Right.
When did you start doing that? That's great. Well, who else was involved? And that's great. And just had them sitting there talking for hours. And I was basically getting free seminars or free education from just asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, man. I really do. And I know there's a lot of value in that for our listeners. And I think one of the big takeaways that I heard you say there in not too many words is that ultimately our egos can become our greatest enemies, right?
Yeah.
If we're willing to approach people and have some humility and ask more questions than boast about what we're doing, we're typically going to extract a lot out of that conversation, right? And so really, really great point, man. Very grateful that you brought that up. So Willie, I'm going to shift a little bit. I think that was a really great opening because you talked about mindset, the lessons that you learned in school, how you carry that over to being real estate entrepreneur today. And then also some of the lessons that you've learned to not only overcome challenges, but to expand what you're doing, and how you started changing your thinking to put yourself in front of more people and expand your network, which ultimately started paying you back, right? Paying you back in information or wisdom, which you then were able to convert into wealth. So awesome, man. I really appreciate you doing that. I want to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to talk about deal sourcing and closing. Okay, because I know that's one of the areas that you identified as a strength of yours, which I really appreciate. So talk a little bit about that. Why do you feel that that's a strength? And then let's talk maybe about an example so that we can make this real for our audience, right? We can add some color to it for our audience. Go ahead, man, elaborate on that. I think that's a great topic.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I used to, again, it came back to just me reading everything and trying to be the smartest guy when it came to real estate and trying to know and do everything myself. So everyone reads about, new investors. What's the best marketing strategy or deal strategy, right? Is it hanging up bandit signs? Is it sending out mailers? Is it cold calling? Is it whatever it may be? And all of those strategies can be great. I've done them all. I've had some success with some. I've had some success with others, but not so much with others. Mailing tends to work a little bit better in the height of the recession or the bottom of the recession. It doesn't tend to work in stabilized and appreciating markets. Cold calling can be very tiresome. Two things that have helped me really scale my business is, one, I would say that you want to treat your company like a company. And by that, I mean, you want to always be putting yourself in your highest and best use. So I learned that as I started to, you're going to have this, let me back up. You're going to have this inverse relationship that kind of shifts back and forth. I cold call, I spend weeks cold calling, I finally get a great deal. And now my focus shifts once I get that great deal to financing that great deal, getting private lenders in or whatever I need to do to get it financed. And then once I get the deal in, now my focus is turned to construction and rehabbing that deal. And then my focus turned into leasing it up and putting great tenants in there. The problem I have with that is as I was going through steps 3, 4, 5, and 6, I was no longer cold calling. I stopped lead generating. My pipeline was going up and down. I looked like I was in a bad stock market, a really volatile stock market. So one of the things that I've learned and one of the things that I preach to new investors is you have to treat your business like a business. If you stop lead generating and start moving on to those other steps, then you have a problem. So at each phase, what I try to do now is create a system and a checklist or whatever it may be that I can hand off to a virtual assistant or somebody else or my wife or a child or a cousin or somebody else, an intern, somebody else who wants to be in the business. If I have the perfect script for cold calling, do I still need to cold call? Can I continue to now make a script, make a process, put something in place where I can now hand that off to somebody else and say, once you get this person online, these are the things that you want to go over with them. And if they have interest, then you can call me back into the deal and I can kind of take it and close it. Or on the construction side, can I put things in place? Do we always use the same materials, the same flooring, the same sinks? Do we go to the same plumber and ask for the same quality of work to be done there? So McDonald's is the example that I always go back down to. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16 and it took them 24 hours to train me. And the reason that I was able to train so quickly is because they have a manual and a process for everything. There is no guesswork into how long the burger takes on the right side before it's flipped over to the left side. There is no guesswork in how long the fries are dropped in the fryer later before they're pulled back up. There is a timer, a system, and something in place for everything. So can you model your business like a McDonald's, like a Walmart, and put processes and things in place where, I have 20 virtual assistants at the moment that are working on various parts of my business while I'm on this call with you. That was number one. And then number two, leverage, using other people's systems and tools, more people in this lead generation thing. I stopped doing the cold calling, the mail marketing, and I haven't done most of those lead generation tactics in years. What I do now is I talk to everyone who will possibly listen to me. And I never stop talking. And that's one of the things that new investors are afraid to do when they first get in. They don't even consider themselves as an investor. They won't talk at the bar about what they do, and they'll just talk about their day job, their 9 to 5, but they won't mention the investment portfolio that they're trying to build. For me, it's anyone. I don't care if you're an insurance agent, and a probate attorney, a real estate agent, you sell life insurance, you're just a guy walking down the street at the bus stop. Everyone knows someone who's looking to sell some real estate. Everyone knows someone who's in a distressed home. Everyone knows someone, and it may not be that day. I talk to them, sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 years before that repeated conversation of Willie is a real estate investor and this is what he does. And they see me on the podcast and they see me in this. And it's just that repetition where I become top of mind in my particular market.
Yeah,
when
like
somebody
that.
says, here's what I need to sell, or here's my grandmother or my aunt, Willie is the guy that you need to talk to. At the beginning, you're going to do your marketing tactics, but as you start to build up a relationship with the people in your neighborhood, the people in your community, you start to build a niche for yourself in your particular market. It becomes more of a continued conversation with the public. And then you start to, leads just start to fall in your lap after that.
Nice. So where do you feel you create the highest leverage as a marketer inside of your lead sourcing systems, right? Where are you getting the greatest amount of leverage? What system?
Having conversations like this with you, having conversations on podcasts. I mean, the podcasts are really popular nowadays, to be quite frank and be honest. I mean, everyone, I'm going to say everyone, but a lot of people are starting them. A lot of people have a solid listenership, and rightfully so. I mean, podcasts weren't popular, I would say weren't as popular 5 years ago, but to think about the idea that you can turn this on and somebody's listening right now to us in their car while they're driving to work. Somebody's listening right now, while they're cooking dinner. Somebody's listening to you and I right now while they're dropping their kid off at daycare on the drive home. So there are very efficient ways to educate yourself. And that's where I try to be. If one person, finds value in this, that's great. I mean, you're in California, I'm in Boston. We're on opposite sides of the country. Why would I hop on a podcast in California if I'm in Boston and bulk of my portfolio is there? Well, there is somebody in California right now who just inherited a property in Boston, who's never been to Boston, has no desire to come to cold-ass Boston, and wants to get rid of it. Now they know the name Willie Mandrell, and they know that I'm a buyer for multifamily properties in Boston. It's as simple as that.
I love it, man. I love that. All right, man, we're going to shift over to construction. And I know this was an area that you said that you love, right? You love deconstructing things and putting them back. Yep. So let's talk a little bit about construction, all right? Now, inside of construction, a couple different components to construction. I'm only going to speak to this a little bit about how we segment construction out and how we build process around construction. Yep. Then I'm going to turn it over and just get your viewpoint on this. But apartment buildings, a little bit different than some of the other asset types. But typically, when we started in this, we broke this out in such a way where we had a pre-construction checklist, right? So when we take a look at a property, we had a pre-construction checklist. It was really simple, one-page checklist. It helped us go out there to assess and try to figure out what kind of deferred maintenance the property had and how much it would cost roughly, right? And that was only good for properties that were actually going to be rehabbing, okay? Value add type projects. Yeah. And then from there, we built out a checklist predominantly for contractors, okay? Qualifying contractors in until, of course, we had a couple of folks that we've worked with over the years that perform. So we don't have to do that anymore, right? We don't have to qualify in contractors. But then from that process, it's okay. We have an idea of what this is going to cost. Now we have to get out and we have to create a scope of work that's a little cleaner, right? So we want to get the contractor out, or in this case, the subs out, depending on if you self-perform or not, start cleaning up our scope, right? So now we have a cleaner scope. We know what that looks like. And then from there, we just keep moving through the process, right? Eventually, we got to the point where, I think you brought this up earlier as well, where our materials, we had kits for almost everything, right? A, B, and C kits. We call them an A, B, and C kit, right? We had an A product, a B product, and a C product. We had relationships with our material suppliers. They would update our materials list for us. So everything was pretty systematic, okay? When it came to materials, we know who to buy what from. They understood our kits. Depending on the product type, we would either go in and do an A-level rehab, a B-level rehab. We didn't really do Cs, but we had this cheap C-level kit that we almost never used. So I don't even know why we still kept it around, but we did, right? So talk a little bit about construction, man, because it's an area that I think creates a lot of pain for a lot of people. I know I've gone through a couple of projects and had a couple of very expensive seminars with construction, but it's an area where, because there's complexity, there's also a lot of opportunity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I can talk for 3 hours about this, but I'm going to try to I'm going to try to
Let's do
give
it.
you,
Let's do it. I love it.
as best a quick summary as I can. One of the things that I always suggest for new investors, new landlords when they're first getting into the business, and one of the things I did, and I mean this literally, this is not an exaggeration. I've spent thousands of hours, very close, maybe it's hundreds of hours or high hundreds of hours, walking the aisles of Home Depot and Lowe's and whatever your general home store is. And what I'm doing when I'm doing that, my wife used to call me and she'd say, "Where are you?" "I'm at Home Depot." "Well, what are you buying now?" And I'm not, I used to spend my free time at Home Depot educating myself, walking up and down the aisles. And what I was doing is I was looking at the difficulty of these projects. And a lot of times on the display, they'll show you exactly how things are done. And you can read the back packaging and see how tile is laid out.
Right.
What is the price of a toilet? If a plumber comes to me and says, "Hey, I need a new toilet. My toilet's leaking." And they say, "Well, $1,000. Is that a good price or a bad price?" I'm going to say it's a bad price because I know a toilet in Home Depot can run me, anyway from 100 to 200, and 300 is a really, a nice toilet, American standard. I know that. So I'm going to say, well, a toilet is $100. You're trying to tell me that your labor is $900 to install this toilet. So when you start understanding the prices of material, I understand the price of a toilet, the price of shingles, and how rubber roofing is priced out, and the cost of a 2x4. When you start to understand these things and you spend this much time in Home Depot walking up and down and looking at materials, you can kind of separate contractors' bid from their labor and their materials. And if you have a really good understanding of materials, then you really kind of, separate
Price
those
the
two
labor.
and price the labor and understand like now
That's a
you
good
can
point.
compare apples to apples with another laborer and everything else. And you can understand like a hot water tank, 40-gallon hot water tank might run me $700. If it costed me $2,000 to install it, then I know that labor is roughly $1,300. I would say that would be on the high end, especially for someone like me who is giving that plumber consistent work, volume over and over again. I would say that if you can install that hot water tank for me for another $750 or somewhere around there, I would say that's fair. I'm costing me $1,500 to put that tank in, whereas a retail client, someone who doesn't have rental units, it's costing them closer to $2,000. So first, educating yourself, getting in and out of those aisles of Lowe's and Home Depot, whatever I don't know if they're the same home stores or on the opposite coast, but just going in, and those stores also have classes as well. Home Depot does a lot of classes in terms of how to install tile and how to do different things and servicing your heating system and all those different things. So I am not handy by any respect. And that's not what I'm telling people. I'm not saying go out and do it yourself. I'm saying educate yourself. You know what needs to be done so you can have an intelligent conversation with your contractor. If you have no idea what your contractor is talking about, it's very hard for you to push back or price it out accordingly. You just have to kind of take what they're giving you. And then that would be kind of my beginning phase. I'm always going to push when it comes back to, contractors and subcontractors that I'm using, making them understand that this is not a retail job. I'm not Jim homeowner. I am going to come back to you time and time again. There's a relationship that I want to build with you. I'm going to be in this business for 20 years, 30 years. And as your business grows, as my business grows, I want your business to grow with you as well. Here in the Northeast, a plumber is crucial for you. You have to have plumbing. Every time it's a plumbing issue, it's an emergency, especially with heating as we move into the winter. You want to have a solid relationship with that plumber and say, look, I know when you have that emergency call to John, homeowner, it's a one-time thing. I own 5, 6, 10, and I don't plan on stopping there. That portfolio is growing. Can we establish something where I'm getting that repeat business from you? And the other thing is you're looking for payment on your invoice from day one. Can we set something up where my rents are coming in on the first of the month? Can you invoice me and wait 2 weeks for it or something like that as we start to build up a relationship here? It starts off a little slow, but most of my vendors understand where I'm coming from and I get billed whenever they get time. But one of the things to dive deeper into construction, I love that this part of the business. This is where real money can be made. To give you an idea of what we're doing in Boston, I don't buy anything rent ready anymore. I haven't bought a move-in ready property in 5 or 6 years at this point. Everything that we're looking for now needs a substantial amount of work. The roof is leaking, the windows are bad, the heating systems don't work, all new appliances are needed, cabinets are bad, everything down to the studs could be awful. And the typical deal that we're doing here is we're probably buying at about $600,000 for a 3-family. We're probably putting about $200,000 to $250,000 in. So we're into it for $850,000, and it'll probably be worth $1 million to 1.1 when it's all said and done. So the opportunity to buy things at a deep discount, go through the construction process, understanding how to create value, And to sidetrack just a little bit, I know I told you I can talk about this for hours. One of the reasons that we're able to create value is because we don't bounce around. And again, I know, some investors do several different markets. I really understand our market. So when we go in, we have the same plumber, the same carpenter, the same electrician. They know what needs to be done. We have, like you said, a process in place. We're using most of the same materials. We understand our tenant base. We understand exactly what the unit is going to rent for prior to us. We understand what the tenant expectations are. We understand that we can get away with a fiberglass tub versus tile in our particular market. And understanding those three things, what's the building side, the client tenant expectation, timeline, and everything else, you can create some real value. That's where real wealth is built. When we have a stabilized asset, and from month 9 or month 12, we have a total of $250,000 in equity that's built in right from the start, opposed to somebody who is buying that asset at 1-1 and now is waiting for their debt to be paid down or waiting for future appreciation. We're walking into many of these deals with $250,000 in equity right from the start.
Nice, man. Nice. I really appreciate the summary. Where do you find the greatest leverage point in construction, right? So if you had to take the whole construction process from beginning to end, I agree, right? Along that tandem, there's a massive opportunity to add value, right? But where do you find the greatest leverage point in your business with construction?
Where do I find the greatest leverage point? You mean like when you say leverage, what can I step away from and put somebody else on?
So what I mean by leverage is, where do you create the greatest value inside of your construction process?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I would say here it's repurposing or rezoning. And I think that's probably across the country. And hopefully I'm answering your question correctly.
Sure.
So we'll take, for instance, a 3-family property, because that's the majority of what we're doing. And what we'll do is they're traditionally set up as a 2-bedroom, 1-bath with a living room and dining room. And, the hallway is a ton of wasted space. So by adding an extra bedroom is often what we'll do. We'll remove the dining room. It'll be now a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. We'll open up the floor plan, make it nice, open living room, kitchen concept. And by adding that extra bedroom, we increase the rental income. And by increasing the rental income, we also increase the value of the income from the property and the value of the property, respectively. So that's what we do kind of over and over again. It's not a very complex thing, but I would say adding square footage, not typically something we do. A lot of our homes are built in the 1920s here. There's probably another home right behind it. So there's not a lot of square footage to be added either out or anything, but it's changing or repurposing the dining room and making it a bedroom and making the unit itself a little bit more useful. That answers your question.
Sure. I appreciate that. Well, Willie, we're approaching the end of our show, bud. I want to thank you. You've been a tremendous guest, man. This has been a great conversation. We started this discussion with some of the lessons that you took away from your experiences in college and how you were able to apply those lessons to this business as a real estate investor entrepreneur. Yep. And, ultimately inside of that discussion, what you spoke about was there's a big difference between what you learn in school, okay, and how you're able to apply that information and learning how money works to be able to build wealth, okay, as an entrepreneur, right? To be able to build wealth.
Yeah.
And so the way that you then segmented that out was you talked about some of your strengths, right? And these are your wealth building drivers. One was your ability to deal source and close deals. 2, how you're able to finance properties, which we talked about in this market, more private money and expanding your network, right? To have more sources of capital. And then lastly, we talked about construction, okay? And you were great at sharing some insight and also some of the key leverage points. One of them is really understanding your cost of materials. And I think this is a great point, right? When you know what your material costs are, it helps you better price out your labor.
Right.
Okay. And usually it's a 1-to-1, right? If your material's costing $1, your labor would also cost roughly, $1. Okay.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing that. Man, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate you having on. Tremendous. What is one question that you have for me, Willie, that you think can add some value to our audience? And then, I'm going to ask you to share your contact information with our audience.
I would say one question that I have for you, and one question, I get from a ton of people as well is, and this is what the problem with most people, you have to have a lot of patience. Things don't happen overnight. We live in a society where things are instant gratification is the expectation of everyone. So I would say to you, or the question I would have for you is, when did you really start to see that exponential growth in your business, what year was it? Was it year 5, 7, 10, where you really start to say, yeah, I made it and this is a right decision for me?
So this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, okay? But the way that I think about this business, it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with, I think, how I think about retirement, right? And my motto is there is no finish line.
Yep.
For some people, that's going to sound exhausting, but I think when you realize that in most countries outside of the United States, there's no word for retirement in most languages. That word doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It was a word created here in the United States by our 401k community, right? Which is massive. Okay. In most parts of the world, that term doesn't exist. So I think the first thing is if you take out that idea, there being a finish line, it puts you in a very different position to build wealth, because while most people are stopping, you're just being very consistent, right? At a very consistent pace. Yep. And I think for me, at least, that's how I operate, right? It's just consistency. Yep. I wake up every day and a lot of the things that I do, man, are really boring. They're super boring. They're very boring, but I'm really consistent at them. Okay. Yep. From working out to how I message my family every day, to the things that I do in my business every day, how I research opportunities. It's boring stuff.
But that boring, that repetition that creates wealth. And I think that's what most people don't understand about this business is it is boring because you've done it. And it wasn't boring when you first started doing, but then that repetition over and over again, you would describe it as boring, but I'm pretty sure you still have fun doing it and you enjoy doing it. But it's that repetition over and over again. And why I only stay with, within a couple of neighborhoods in Boston, I use the same 3-family model. It's that repetition that actually builds wealth. A lot of people like to live in an Instagram exciting life where they're doing this and they're always jumping off this and something new, which is fine. But if you really want to build wealth, you have to have that repetition, in my opinion. And that's really what the real money is created in, those little nuances, the things that you and I could be doing the same thing, but it's that little bit more that you know about it than I do that really separates the two of us at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one way that I like to interpret that is you have to get comfortable doing things. Wealth is built by us, our willingness to do things that most people simply are not, right? The reality, though, is those things, they're very mundane things. They're not complicated. They're just freaking, for the most part, they're just not very exciting. You have to be willing to do those things every day on a very consistent basis to be able to move your business forward. It may not move forward at lightning speed, but if you're really consistent with them over time, and that stuff compounds.
It really
does. And it starts to compound at an exponential rate, right?
And that would be my last thing. And then I'll let you go, John, as we wrap this thing up. Is that's actually what I always kind of conclude these things off with. Most people don't understand that when you say it starts to just kind of snowball, or I kind of like to describe it as the airplane effect, right? And most people think that wealth is kind of like this staircase and this financial freedom. Like every time you do something, you read a new book or you should see some type of progress. And it's really not like that. It's like flying in an airplane. It takes a lot of thrust and energy and power to get off the runway. But then once you're at 10,000 feet, most people don't realize, from 10,000 to 30,000 is an absolute breeze and you really don't even notice the change.
That's a great analogy, man.
Not to sound arrogant, but it takes a long time to get to $100,000 net worth, a little bit shorter to get to, $500,000, and then probably almost half that time to get to $1 million. And then from $1 million to multi-millions, it just, from that 10,000 to 30,000 feet, it just feels like flick of a switch. But it's that repetition that you're talking about.
And you know what, man, I really don't believe that it's arrogance. I know you say that with humility, and I really appreciate that. But I think there's a piece there that's undervalued, right? Because everybody wants to know, where did you start, point A, and how you got to point Z? But very few people are willing to discuss everything that happened in between.
Right.
And, you have to be willing to do the things between A and Z, right? Because in between that path, there's a lot of challenge, a lot of road bumps. There are a lot of great times. But if you read every single biography out there of anyone that has done anything substantial in the United States or in the world, whether it be, Bill Gates, the owner of Alibaba. I love that book, by the way, Alibaba.
Yeah.
Okay. Jim Ma, I love that guy. Let's see, the founder of Apple. If you read these books, man, What those biographies are really about is their ability to overcome challenge, right? And inside of this business, you very rarely hear about people talking about or asking questions around the greatest obstacle they ran into and how they overcame that. My guess is if you had those discussions, if you line 10 multimillionaires, right? If you put 10 people in front of you and they were able to build massive amounts of wealth, and you ask them, where was the turning point for you? My guess, okay, it would be somewhere around or after their first major challenge. Yeah. Because something happens, something clicks, right? And you're like, okay, it really doesn't matter what happens at this point. I know I'm always going to find a way to the finish line. I know I'm always going to find a way. It doesn't matter the obstacle or the opportunity, or I can chase something that has more complexity because I know I'm just going to find a way to the finish line. And I think that's a missing piece for a lot of people is just have to be willing to find a way, man. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to find a way.
I agree.
Willie, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, man?
My website, Mandrellco, MANDRELLCO.com. So my last name, MandrellCO.com. You can go there. I do a free coaching call. If you go /coaching, I do a 30-minute call with people, all over the country. We can chat about your needs, your wants, your desires, anything we can help you with in terms of building out your real estate portfolio. I'm also on LinkedIn. Connect with me there. Bigger Pockets, Willie Mandrell, Instagram, Facebook. I also have a YouTube channel, /W Mandrell as well. A lot of great content there. And this video will hopefully eventually end up on there as well.
Yes, it will, man. So we'll add those items to the show notes. So those items will be at the bottom of the show notes. I appreciate you adding that. And man, you've been a tremendous guest. I want to wish you continued success. And, we will connect very soon, my friend.
Hey, John, it was a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
Anytime, man. Thank you. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.